is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Resistance Rising, a genre wars novel, written by Robin C. Farrell. Chapters 6 through 10. In this episode, Riemann finally decides to take a stand, and I'm growing more and more suspicious of Legren. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. So I wanted to really quickly kind of recap a little bit of, because the last episode that I did on Resistance Rising was on October 20th. So it's been almost 2 full months since I read the first 5 chapters. And obviously, I didn't retain everything. So I reread parts of the first 5 chapters. I didn't reread the whole thing, but I bounced around and got my bearings back. And the thrust of it is that there is a crystal called the anium, which is passed around between different tribes, essentially is what they go by, that chooses who it's going to be chosen, who it's going to be guarded by, and dims itself to signal that the reign of whichever guardians it has is over, and then chooses who it will be guarded by next, I would presume by lighting up when that tribe comes in contact with it or is near it or whatever. And the prologue is a person that we are not told his name. He goes by Mr. X, trying to thwart what how the anium normally works, and instead of waiting for it to choose whomever it will be guarded by next, Mr. X wonders what would happen if you just tried to take it. Would anything be set off? Is that there's no record of somebody attempting to take control of the anium by basically main force? So, and this person has some magical ability, so I think he thinks that he's going to be able to withstand whatever the anium throws at him. And the anium at the time of it being stolen is in the possession of the Phantasarians. And he goes in and just straight up grabs it with bare hands. And the anium stops. It's shining with this light before he grabs it. And the light goes out when he touches it. It turns into a regular crystal. And then the crystal itself begins to crack. And he starts to panic, thinking that it's breaking. And then it seems to explode. And when he comes to, the guards who had been guarding it that he threw against the wall, they're dead. It's unclear whether the anium killed them or whether he killed them when he threw them. And there is this pain in his eye. And when he looks into a reflection of, I don't remember, it's like a kettle or something that's nearby that's burnished metal, he sees that his skin that had been so scarred and marked looks elven. It's so fine and unmarked and perfect. And that basically all of his features have been softened and made beautiful. And he doesn't realize until a few seconds later that the pain in his eye is the anium that has become lodged in his eye socket. And it's, again, unclear if this is the entire anium, if this is a piece of it, if it did break when he touched it the way it seemed to. It's sort of, left up to interpretation. Based on some dialogue in these chapters, I think it broke, but I'm not positive how that would work. I was hoping that Robin might be in the chat on Crowdcast when I did this episode, because there are some things that I would like to have clarified, but I'm going to do my best, and hopefully you guys will be able to bear with me on this. And Robin, if you commission a follow-up episode, if you have any corrections to this that you want me to address in the next episode, just let me know. All right, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's start off with chapter 6, which is from Legren's perspective. Legren is like when we ended off chapter 5. Riemann had just started to be kind of coerced. Coerced is too aggressive a word. Convinced to help out the Phantasarians, because what Legren wants to do is basically start a revolution where all of the different tribes work together, and rather than the Aeneum choosing one tribe or another, I think he wants to share it in a continuous way more, and believes that I believe that he thinks the Aeneum has more ability than it's been exploited for, that it could make things work between the different tribes in a more harmonious manner than what they have been doing so far, but they have not pushed it hard enough to make that happen. So I found that kind of interesting, and this section, like, Riemann had just put some sensors in place, agreeing to help to a degree the Phantasarians in defending themselves, because the mechs, which Riemann is a part of, the mechs have more advanced technology, which could be used to protect their little community. So Riemann puts these guards in place, and they immediately pay off, because this community called Nenjin break in and start to cause havoc. And the Nenjin are basically ninjas, but with like a chi power, so that they can like throw fire. I imagine, like, we haven't seen evidence of this. I don't know if it's always fire or if some of them have control of other elements, but chi is usually meant, like, when you talk about chi, it's usually meant to be symbolized by fire. So if they only manage chi, I think it probably is exclusively fire that they work with. And that is how we end chapter 5, is Riemann running out to like meet whatever threat has started to break into the camp and realizing that it's Nenjin. So I just wanted to like let you guys know that I chose chapter 6 through 10, which is just shy of 50 pages actually, because I knew that there were going to be, because of the amount of time that had passed between the first and second episodes covering this, that there was going to be a lot of stuff that I would need to backtrack and re-explain, or at least re-explain to myself. If those of you who are listening to these, episodes covering this one after another, for you, no time has passed. But like I said, it's been almost 2 months. So I will probably have to stop and like readjust how I'm talking about things at times if I remember something. So I wanted to give myself a little bit of space on that. So chapter 6 starts off with Legren, and he is, like heading out as well with Riemann to find out who is attacking the town. And there's an interesting little moment where he's thinking to himself about like defending this township, and that a dormant impulse stirred, compelling Legren to unleash the prowess of his days as the king's favorite in the royal guard. And yet something held him back. Newer, keener intuition pulled him deeper in the barn. Sword drawn, Legren crossed the opposite threshold and waded into the tall grass of the meadow beyond. He made no sound, but without his armor every inch of exposed flesh tingled. A white blur flickered at the edge of the field. So there's a man named Dorigen, and Dorigen is an elite assassin whom Legren has fought before. And when they fought, it was left to a draw. Nobody actually won. And it sort of like stings him to this day that he wasn't able to get a decisive victory. And I'm sure that it stings Dorigen as well. So Dorigen is sort of assessing Legren here and notices the scar in Legren's left eye. So that signals to me that this scar was not here when he fought Legren last time. And they start to go at each other, and immediately Dorigen is disarmed. The katana soared out of Dorigen's grasp and sank into the grass. Legren hurled the broadsword down, but Dorigen flung up his scabbard. The impact forced Dorigen to his knees. I know what you are looking for. It is not here, Legren said, and stepped back. Dorigen hesitated before he lowered his scabbard. He smirked and stood to retrieve his fallen weapon. You do not know much about the Onium, do you? His voice was every bit as arrogant and patronizing as Legren remembered. We don't have the Onium. We never had it. Are you sure? Dorigen taunted. He stood up and retrieved his fallen weapon. What about part of it? So that makes me feel like either I would love to get, I wish that I could get some answers on this again, because I know that we talked about this in the last episode, and I maybe should have re-listened to the last episode. I'm not remembering exactly how much time has passed since it was stolen and now. But I'm wondering if Dorigen, knowing that there's a part of the Onium, like that it can be broken into pieces, that feels like some insider information. That feels like something that apparently not everybody knows, because Mr. X, when he grabbed the Onium and it begins to crack, Mr. X panics and thinks that he's like really fucked it up. So either Mr. X did not know that there being parts of the Onium in different places was even possible, or Mr. X knew that it was possible, but he didn't know it worked the way that it does, which makes it look like it's just breaking. But in any case, the fact that Dorigen seems to know something about the way the Onium works that Legren doesn't, it infuriated me that Legren doesn't ask any further questions about this. Legren just like gets thrown backwards and then is immediately distracted by the fact that they have Boza as a prisoner, who is a Viking. And so he gets so distracted by like worrying about his friend that he doesn't ask the question about like, well, what do you mean part of it? How could that even be? And I just can't, I really wonder about, again, if enough time has passed, like, I mean, Legren is supposed to be Elven. He has this scar on his eye. Of course I'm thinking that Legren is Mr. X, and that the Onium wedged itself in his eye and made him look Elven, and everyone's accepting that he's Elven, when maybe he's not. And also, I don't know that the Onium, if it's like a force for good, which it seems to be, that's something that's not really like specifically said. I'm not sure that the Onium is something that's specifically for good, or if it could be manipulated to be either good or evil, depending on whose hands it's in. But could the Onium take over the person whom it lodged itself into? Could the man who stole it, Mr. X, be forever altered in his mind and heart by having this thing inside of him? And because obviously Legren does not seem to be like a power-hungry warrior. You know what I mean? He's not the type that you get the impression Mr. X is. But depending on how much time has passed, depending on how the Onium works, I could see this Neum almost like possessing a person and making that person an instrument of its own agenda, which might be to unite everybody. Maybe the Neum has seen that people are not, that the tradition of having it lighten and darken according to who it should be guarded by hasn't been working. So I would be very curious to know what's going on with Legren's eye, and if that's related. The way that the Dorigen says, the way that Dorigen says, what about part of it, almost makes me think that they have like a tracking ability where they sensed that part of it was here. And maybe that's because Legren has it in his body. And I'm not sure if Legren is even aware of it, because we're in his POV. We're hearing his thoughts. And he never thinks to himself, nobody knows that I have it, or anything like that. So it's unclear right now whether or not, if he is possessed by it, as is my theory at the moment, he even knows about it, or if he's doing that thing that, like, for example, in Gone Girl, where there is a character that we are in his POV and he's accused of murder, and despite us being in his POV, he never ever thinks about whether or not he murdered his wife. You'd never get a distinct, no, I didn't do it. Yes, I did do it. And really it's a contrivance, right? That we don't ever get a distinctive answer from him. So if we're not getting that from Legren, it could be because that's how the writer wants it. And it's inconvenient to have him thinking of that, and so we're just not going to have it. It could be because he is not aware that this thing is with him. Or it could be that it's not even in his head at all, and that I'm like wildly off base. So I guess we shall see. But I feel like my theory is sort of given some credence here, because I'm already feeling this way. And then Legren gets stabbed right through with a katana through the ribs, and goes down and is laying in a pool of blood, looking completely inert, so convincingly dead that Dorigen just leaves him there. And that when Riemann sees him when he's fighting on his own, he like glances over and sees Legren on the ground. He's convinced he's dead. Assumes, like, there's not a question like, oh, he's so wounded, I hope he's okay. It's, oh my God, he's dead. Look at him. Like, there's not a single doubt. But inexplicably, Legren is not dead. And it's like a kind of, he's more than just okay. He's like so much more okay than he should be, that it's alarming people. Which feels like the Neum has to be at play here and healing him, because he is its host. And there's this moment, laying on his side, he could not move, even as he felt the katana withdraw from his body. Blood streamed down his front, along with his life force. Where is the Neum now? Just as in the clearing, in his last few aching seconds, he felt not fear or anger, but regret. They would all die like this, destroying each other rather than consider another way. He'd had so much time, influence too, and he'd squandered both. Given a second chance, he'd tried, made attempts to fight the wars, leading him here on the ground in a helpless heap. It had been a gamble, but he just couldn't walk away from it anymore. He never would have taken up the charge if not for his walking out of the demolished clearing from what would have been certain death. So, I'm not clear on what he's referencing here. For his walking out of the demolished clearing from what should have been certain death. He'd survived only long enough to eventually be stabbed by an old enemy, but he had made use of that extra time, and only for that did he succumb to the void in peace. So again, it sounds like he dies, right? But he doesn't. So let's go to chapter 7, which is Riemann. And he is fighting a Nenjin woman who is firing. She's whipping around him with this like super fast martial arts that he cannot keep up with. She's shooting fire at him, he's outmatched, and he knows he's outmatched, and he's really tired. And he got trained in some hand-to-hand combat, but evidently it's essentially useless against somebody with the kind of skill this woman has. And then, let's see. Shoot, I'm trying to find the spot. Oh yeah, here it is. He popped back up, thrusting the gun towards the woman, but she wasn't looking at him. She crouched and held up her arms, pointed out towards him in a defensive position, but her head was turned to the side. Her eyes widened and her mouth fell slightly open. Riemann gripped the gun tighter, then followed her gaze. In the adjacent field, a male Nenjin towered over a figure lying motionless in the grass. Legren. A dark stain spread rapidly across his tunic while the Nenjin held a silver curved blade smeared with blood. Riemann could only stare, rooted to the spot. Wait, no, that can't... You're not a Phantasarian, the woman's voice called. Riemann's attention snapped away from the field, back to the threat across from him. The woman's hands still hovered, poised in midair, but no flame encircled them. Yet. And, Riemann said, her head tilted to the side. What is a mech doing fighting alongside a Phantasarian? Quit the chatter and tell me why you've come here, Riemann demanded. You know why we came, she said, her voice like velvet. It's here in this camp. No, it isn't. The Unium... And then he just gets jumped from behind, and he manages to escape, but when he runs, he gets fire shot at him that really, gets him. He gets it right in the calf. And he's cornered, and you would think that this woman pursuing him is going to burn his ass up, right? He hides behind a tree for a time, and he I think he, fools himself into thinking, oh, I'm out of sight now. But she clearly knows exactly where he is, and she just stops firing at him long enough for him to stick his head out. And I'm thinking, of course, she's just trying to lure him into a false sense of security so that he will reveal his position and she'll be able to get him. But instead, he finally pokes his head out, and she's looking directly at him. But she's not making a move. He didn't feel a swell of anger, but rather confusion and curiosity, and even from the distance he could tell that she regarded him in the same way. They both seemed to be thinking, why are you here? She'd asked him outright, and he might have considered mentioning the resistance if not for the shock of Legren's fall. Plus, despite Legren's repeated assurances that he was free to go, some part of him still felt paradoxically trapped and unwelcome there just by his very identity. But this attack didn't make tactical sense. There were no persons of importance here, no treasury to loot. If Legren was their target, why storm the place? Or were they on a mission to murder innocents? So he's watching this woman, and finally, she just turns and leaves. And he's fucking baffled by this. It just doesn't make sense to him. She clearly has let him go because I think she doesn't understand what's at play here. And she doesn't, killing Phantasarians was on the menu. Killing a mech was not. And I'm thinking she just doesn't know how to cope with this change. So she decides to err on the side of caution and really stick to the mission. So he gets up and he starts to leave. Just straight up leave, because he still feels as if he is a prisoner despite having been told that he could go. But the one thing that was keeping him in place was a sort of low-key hope for Legren's plan, I believe. He was hoping maybe Legren was right and they could make this work and he could be part of it and contribute. But instead of treating, he still viewed himself as a prisoner. If he tried to leave, he would call their bluff and they would reveal the fact that he wasn't actually free to go if he wanted. And I think that's I really understand that kind of feeling that, well, you say I'm free as long as I'm not actually trying to leave. And then all of a sudden it would be an issue. So Riemann now, Legren in his mind is dead. And there's nothing keeping him here now. The vague, maybe promise that he had made There's no other leader for this resistance that he knows of. Legren seems like the one that believes in it, and nobody else does. So, or if they do, they're not the kind of person who has like the charisma to lead this sort of organized resistance. So he's just gonna fucking find his ship and get the fuck out of here. He imagined himself crossing back into I-Corps headquarters, rejoining his squad, reunited with comrades he hadn't seen in what seemed like months. He would regale them with a tale of all he had seen and done. Even Jenda would be impressed. And he's trying to run when all of a sudden he hears screaming and realizes that there are people like in that village being hurt. And he tries to keep going, but it's just his conscience won't let him do it. Like, these are people that he has finally come to see as people versus, God, what would you even say? I feel like vermin might be too strong a word, but it might not be too strong a word. So leaving them to be basically murdered he's just not able to do it. It's this moment. I love this though. What's a mech doing fighting alongside a Fontasarian? She'd said it almost like an accusation, like the whole thing had to be a setup, a trap. It was preposterous. Hadn't Riemann said almost the exact same thing to Legren only hours earlier? And now who would contradict him? It was more than unfair. It was wrong. Riemann had spoken in earnest when he'd agreed that the wars would never end if things kept going as they were. But what could Riemann's participation possibly accomplish in the course of such an immense undertaking? It starts with a 1. The shouts and wails persisted from the camp. There was no accent to them, no defining tribe or other. They were just voices, people. Before he'd realized he'd made a decision, Riemann had already turned, limping back the way he came. So he heads back, and there is just the, horrible, aftermath of a battle. People who are bleeding, buildings on fire, smoke everywhere, livestock that's escaped from their pens. There is a child crying somewhere. And he goes to where Legren had been, but his body is missing. And I, for a second, was like, oh, did he just get up and walk away? But then I was like, no, they moved him probably. He was their leader, so they're trying to treat his body with respect. And I like that there's a moment for Riemann of really being in this and seeing how different it is. He'd seen the aftermath of battle plenty of times, both at home and abroad, but always from the air. He'd volunteered in military hospitals and visited friends in emergency recovery wards, but he had never seen battle up close. He'd attended memorial services for fallen soldiers and even witnessed ships getting shot down, but only from behind his windshield. Being here, surrounded by the victims, however, was an entirely different experience. He caught glimpses of some of the wounds. They mirrored the inflictions he'd seen in those hospital wings, on soldiers struggling through physical therapy. But these were not soldiers. These were innocent civilians. In the back of Riemann's mind echoed the words of the I-Corps advert. Protect, search, and defend the people, the land, the Aeneum, whatever the cost. Is this what they meant? Did I-Corps issue acts of this nature on innocent lives? It was wartime, but how was this protection? Defense? So I like this, that he's really rethinking what he has been taught, which is basically, as they say, whatever the cost. He's suddenly like, well, wait, what does that actually mean? It's one thing to recite that and feel like you're being brave in saying it. It's a very other thing to realize that, I have been part of a system that maybe doesn't have a conscience, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. It's a really, I have a friend, more of a friend of Owen's, but still a friend of mine as well, who had gone to Afghanistan and Iraq, and doesn't talk about his time there, but does say that they misrepresented why they were there. And he knows that now as an adult, but he was a fucking kid when he went and did not know any better and bought into this whole line about freeing these people, and it turns out that's not what it was for at all. And I can't imagine how disillusioning that is. And it seems like Riemann's finally there. And, you know, we've heard about his sister from his thoughts of how tough she is and how, like, how much she is committed to this cause. And if he is taking a totally different view of it than she is, I'm not sure how any sort of reunion that may happen between the two of them is going to go. I like Zatar, who is going between all of the different victims and trying to bring them back. He's using his magic to try and heal people. And he comes across a woman and he tries and nothing happens. And Riemann, watching this and realizing that this woman is dead, almost like vomits. And Zatar looks up and like they kind of have this moment together. And I like that Zatar gets to see Riemann being like vulnerable in that moment. It's a combo of vulnerable and just the sadness of seeing this death, but also vulnerable in that like Riemann's revealing that he does see these people as people now. He's not so cut off and cold-hearted that this mayhem isn't having an effect on him simply because of whom it happened to. So there's a lot of burns and like people who have been affected by the chi. And one of them, Riemann, helps to support the guy until they can get him someplace with people who can help. And when the guy sees that it's Riemann helping him for a minute, he just tries to pull away from him, like, which is, you know, that's, I'm sure, a weird side of things to be on. And I remember that being in the last section as well, that Riemann sees somebody like eyeballing him in a way that's really hostile. And he sort of takes offense at first until he like stops and thinks about it and realizes that like that's exactly how he was as well, to anybody who was not a mech. So I liked this moment that this guy like has this reaction and then immediately is like, you know what? I fucking need the help though. Okay, fine. Let's go. So then he goes into the assembly hall, and there is Legren. His clothes should have been slashed and drenched with blood, but the fabric was new without the slightest stain. So I'm not sure if that's like... Okay, here's the question. Forgive me, I'm drinking some tea to keep my sanity. I'm not sure if this is the author saying that his clothing has been replaced, that they like stitched him up and changed his clothes, or if this is the author saying that the Aeneum is inside this guy and it healed him to such a degree that even his clothing is back to normal. I don't think it can be that second one, because later when we are in Legren's POV, he has pain where he was stabbed. He talks about having stitches. So I think it's just that his clothing has been changed. But the way this is worded caught my attention. They should have been slashed and drenched, but the fabric was new without the slightest stain. So it's just like it feels like it's been written in a way to purposely like draw my attention to it. But I don't know. We'll see. The bandana had been retied around Legren's face, covering his left eye, but Riemann could see blue light leaking out from underneath it. Blue light? Come on. That's what it is, right? It's gotta be. But wouldn't you think that would completely fix his injury, though? I don't know. And Legren is shocked to see Riemann, thinking that he would just run. And basically he's like, so I take it that you've made your choice. And Riemann's like, all right, fine. Yes, I have. So Talina tends to Riemann's burn on his leg. And I like this also. Like there's the fairy or elven steel that has more of an effect on mechs, and we talked about this last time, I compared it to like fairies having a reaction to cold iron. And apparently the chi that the Najin, I've already forgot what they're called, the chi that they use causes lethargy the same way. So that's kind of cool. And Nenjin, I was so close. Cythera comes in while he's in the middle of getting treated, and she does not see him. And she goes right up to Legrin and just starts to like admonish him and assumes that Riemann has run and is very much like told you so about it. And she's in the middle of saying it. I am relieved that he left. He's not our problem anymore, no longer distracting you, me, and everyone else, and we can finally... Riemann cleared his throat. She whirled around and found him sitting along the far wall just outside the firelight. He felt an odd mix of satisfaction and offense as the amusement and triumph drained from her face, replaced with outright horror. Riemann could just barely make out Talina in the corner of his eye, looking back and forth between the two of them. I like this line a lot. Cythera's jaw slid shut into a rock-solid line as she slowly faced Legrin again. So, yeah, Cythera is not a fan, does not believe for a second that he's going to help them, and basically straight up says, I would like to murder him right now, please. To which, of course, Legrin's like, bitch, sit down, stop it. But it's not set aside. This keeps coming up every time that she and Riemann are in the same room together. She's like pestering him about how much she doesn't trust him, about how he's not part of this and he shouldn't be part of this. Just really like she's not making an effort to keep the peace between them and not respecting what Legrin wants. And when Riemann says, you probably still just rather kill me and be done with it, she says, at last he gets it. He lunged forward, impulsive and aggressive, unsure what he was going to say next. When she whipped out her knife, Silver suddenly pointed at his face. So yeah, we're coming to blows. This is not a good situation. But they get, luckily, distracted by I think it's Tali shows up. Zatar and Tali show up together. And they are talking about like the overall damage and everything that happened. I think they said that there are 3 dead, which is less than I had thought, to be honest, but it does seem like such a weird offensive. Like, what were they trying to do? And we still aren't sure yet. We should consider it fortunate that more Nenjin didn't show up at the start, Talina observed. You might both have been killed. Well, one of you, Tali finished. There was a very awkward pause. What is this? Like, do they know something? Do they know? I mean, obviously there's light coming from his eyeball. They know something. But do they know what really? We were lucky, Legrin concurred, sidestepping his survival altogether. But with Riemann here, his mech tech prohibited them from taking us completely by surprise. They must have been studying our practices, Zatar mused. They got past our wards and security points effortlessly. I'll be investigating how exactly they did it. In the meantime, I've applied new and different spells as a precaution. So are we at risk right now? Cythera asked. Zatar shook his head. Just want to be thorough. So Zatar then sees that Riemann is still here and is like, did you decide to join us? And is like much more welcoming and positive about this than obviously Cythera was. I like that, you know, there are going to be some people who are like, oh my God, look, it's working. This is happening. We're all joining up together and being friends. And then there are obviously going to be people that are like, you are so full of shit, which I can't help but understand. I feel like at the age that I'm at now, I really vacillate between those two, where I'm like, part of me really wants to be as hopeful as I used to be, but I've been disappointed enough that I tend to be a little bit more like Cythera. Like, and this isn't, obviously I haven't been involved in anything where I'm like worried about betrayal. Like, I haven't grown up in a tribal atmosphere where there are people fighting each other and that kind of worry. But what I mean is like, just wanting to see the best in people and being disappointed as a rule. And just as you get older, you start to see that people are they don't change that easily. It's not that it's impossible, but it's really, really rare. And I understand her being really suspicious isn't even the word, because suspicious implies that she has her doubts, but that she's giving him a chance. And that's not what's happening. She's not giving him a chance at all. So I would say just outright like aggression towards him. So, okay. Oh, then there's this thing that I don't know, and I don't think this was explained in the previous section, but there's a tremendous amount of work ahead, yes, but we can finally get started with it. How soon can you get the magical side of things up and running? Quickly enough. He's talking to Zatar right now, but even without all the additional complications of this little ninja invasion, it won't be much by myself. I need to run a few tests, and if it's all right, I think I might invite a friend of mine here to lend a hand with some of it. Tilles, she's more than welcome. Now, we should discuss the preliminary necessities. And they're not keeping it from Riemann. They're not like hiding from him what it is that they're trying to do, but he is so like kind of overwhelmed, I guess, with everything that's happened. The battle, his injury, Cythera, who is still sitting there like glaring at him hilariously, that he doesn't really follow everything that's going on. So here comes the thing. Legren was euphoric, downright giddy. In fact, he found it difficult to focus or even remain visibly calm. The wound in his chest griped each time he so much as twitched, making the stitches shift uncomfortably, but already like the subdued groans of long-standing, mostly healed scrapes. Somewhere in his mind he marveled at the absurdity of it all, but no amount of wonder or pain would distract him from the incomprehensible joy welling up inside him. He was just grateful that the bleeding and the glowing had ceased. What? It hadn't taken much to get the conversation rolling. Even Cythera was contributing, and Riemann spoke nearly as much as Legren was, offering information, perspective, and suggestions that Legren never would have anticipated. By the time Brock appeared in the doorway, they were halfway through concocting a plan. So what they want to do is have Riemann go to his people and try and convince them to come over to Legren's side of things, which I really deeply think is a bad idea. Riemann also keeps saying it won't work, and I think that he is right about that. We do find out a little bit later that Riemann is, I'm not sure underestimating is the right word. He's misunderstanding his sister. But I would go so far as to guess that regardless of whether his assessment of her toughness and cold-bloodedness is correct or not, her reaction to this suggestion is still going to be what he expects. So I'm really curious, though. I'm really curious because who knows what conclusions she's going to draw. Everything is so, like, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but there's a lot at play. They're talking through, like, repairing the wards and everything that's going on. And Riemann is saying, again, Jenda doesn't think like that. She'll report it to I-Corps immediately. For all I know, they could just hit me over the head and drag me away without letting me get so much as a word in. How many mechs are we talking about? Brock interjected. 4, counting him, Cythera answered, and all I-Corps soldiers. The policy for search parties is 3 to 4, depending on how many officers can be spared. It's not a significant loss of the core, and I'm not from an important family, so there probably isn't a lot of effort being put into the search for me. My money's on a team of 3, 2 of my close friends, and probably my sister. Riemann finished with an uncertain, borderline bitter emphasis on the probably. On bad terms, are you? Zatara asked. No, it's just... And he tries to be like, well, they probably think I'm dead, but obviously... Riemann thinks that his sister doesn't really care about him. And that's so untrue, as we see later. It's just that she does not know how to communicate that to him. She reacts to strong emotion and loss by shutting herself down and focusing on work. And to him, it's the equivalent of not having feelings at all and not giving a shit. And when we are in her POV, she thinks that he understands where she's coming from and that he is like unchanged by what's happened to their parents, which we get a reveal later of exactly how that all happened. But she's wrong about that. He is deeply affected and he's just not talking about it or sharing it with her because she made it really clear she's not interested in doing that with him. So this moment is really sad because he just doesn't even know that his sister would be involved in the search at all. Like, he really doesn't have faith that she'd be out looking for him. And we know that not only is she out looking for him, but she's like really pushing it. Like, they could have gone back and she's the one keeping them out there. And it's not just from a sense of duty. This is a genuine, like, she cares about him and is worried. So he's just so wrong about who she is and what she thinks of him. So we have Zatar trying to say that his friends and family would be predisposed to listen to him. And Riemann's like, no, they won't. They're going to think that I've been brainwashed because that's what we are taught happens, that you guys fuck with people's minds, that there's psychological elements at play. The second they know this location, they'll report back to I-Corps and try to bomb this place. Bomb it? Zatar repeated. A civilian settlement? Or, as an alternative, Brock suggested you could just initially leave out the exact coordinates of our village. And I like that he says that, just like, well, you could just not tell them where we are. But he would, I think that Riemann is right, that whether he tells them or not, they'll fucking figure it out. Like, I think he's right. I do. What if you were still inside with the rest of us? Send someone else to get them. Draw them in. Are you volunteering? Legren asked. No, she said pointedly, but if those are my orders, I will follow them. You'd have to be really convincing, Riemann said. I could help with that, Zatar said, some kind of persuasion charm or other. Or physical evidence, Tali suggested. Do you have any sort of keepsake? Yeah, but they just think you took it off my corpse after killing me. Quite the savages, aren't we? Brock noted sarcastically to Zatar, who nodded with a bit of an eye roll of his own. I like that a lot. Just like hearing what your enemy thinks of you and then being so completely off base and assigning these, like, you know, sort of brutal tactics to you that you don't have at all. I really like that moment of like, oh, these guys, they're so fucking suspicious and we are so not doing that kind of thing. So that's what they're going to do. They decide finally. It's just try and convince them to come. Try and convince Riemann's people to come to them. Probably the best tactic, but I still don't know that it'll work. We'll see. So I'm trying to find this next like little section that I wanted to talk about. Give me one sec. Oh yeah. Then Brock saying, as he's talking later with Legren, that they obviously were using this battle and this invasion a little bit as a diversion. That it's way too arbitrary and chaotic to be the sole thing the Nenjin wanted to do. Like, they don't just come in and wreak havoc and then run. They came in to get everybody's attention while something else was going on. And we find out later that Brock is exactly right and that Legren all of his like maps and plans and everything were out on his desk, and there is a handprint on one of them, a very faint one that he almost wouldn't have been able to see if he hadn't been sitting at exactly the right angle, which means that they were coming in to steal intelligence on what his plans are, and they definitely got it. And I'm curious, like, how exactly they take that information. Do they just look and remember? Do they take pictures? I mean, I don't know what kind of technology they have, but I'm assuming they don't have cameras. But he's worried enough about it that it feels like a pretty big deal. So Legren approached Riemann, having second thoughts. Would it make a difference if I was? Certainly. Riemann scoffed. I said it before and I'm saying it again. We can't proceed with this plan without you. And Riemann acts like that's not true, but I think he's totally in denial because he can't handle the pressure, to be honest. So Cythera sees them talking and comes up a little after Riemann walks away and is like, well, aren't you guys buddies? Are we going to have a new second in command soon? And I'm just like, girl, you need to stop it. Like, listen, I totally get not trusting the guy, and that's fine. But stop assigning, like, this, what's the word that I want? This nefarious relationship, like some sort of meaning, like, stop seeing it that way. The whole attitude that she has here is just so childish in some ways, because it's one thing to not trust somebody because of who they are and where they come from and they're being your enemy for so long. It's another thing to be like weirdly jealous and petulant about it, and that's what's happening right here, and I'm not for it. You didn't say much about this new plan, even regarding your role in it. That wasn't entirely true, but he hoped this might prompt a more honest reaction from her, an argument to say the least. So? Apparently not. Legren sighed. Is this how it's going to be? You stew in silence, carry out orders simply because you feel obligated, then pick fights with Riemann at every turn? I notice you didn't give him the same lecture. He's not the one I'm worried about. Just me, then? She shrugged. Suppose I should be used to that by now. Like, listen, but you are the one. He isn't pushing the shit. The next thought that he has is she has a point, but I don't think she does. She may have been referring to his lack of self-concern and inexplicable escape from death. Somehow they had avoided the topic during the meeting, apart from her initial deriding him when she arrived in the hall. Her turmoil had been so clear in her voice, even Riemann must have noticed it, and now this laid-back demeanor made him yearn to ask her directly. Could he do that? Breach the question that had been eating away at him for so many months? With this new plan in motion, was there finally room for a real open conversation between them? I don't know what he's talking about here, but he clearly thinks that he knows something that's going on with her, and he's just afraid to bring it up. All he can manage to ask her, he doesn't even ask her, he just says, you seem troubled. And she doesn't really respond to that. And finally, he's like, listen, do you want to be a part of this or not? Because frankly, I can't deal with this like half in, half out shit. Either you want to be part of the rebellion and the resistance and change things, and that means being on board with Riemann because he's a key element, or you just go and do whatever the other fuck you want. But you can't have this like in and out bit going on forever. And she says, I can be on board and not like everybody that's involved. And he starts to argue with her, and she's like, listen, I won't kill him, okay? That's like all I can say. I'm not going to kill him. That's about as much as I can promise to you. I don't like the guy. I'm not going to like the guy. And I'm like, well, that's fair. But they're like, you can be on board and not like somebody without constantly like sort of poking and prodding them, trying to get a rise out of them either. And I feel like she needs to calm down with that. So, yeah, the next scene is Legren looking at some of his maps and realizing that shit has been rifled through and seen. And at this point, where's the part that I'm trying to find? Here it is. The High Kingdom had been fending off such threats for years, but more in the recent months. Would Dorigen take this information to his master? No, Dorigen is masterless, so why sneak in to steal intelligence? Would he go directly to the Phantasarian court? He didn't know that Legren still lived, but perhaps he would wish to underscore his victory over the former king's favorite. You do not know much about the Aeneum, do you? Evidently, no. With a deep breath, Legren flopped back down onto the bed. He was grateful to be alive, certainly, but inexplicably surviving now 2 death sentences was a fact he shouldn't ignore. His beliefs were unchanged, that the Aeneum somehow controlled these events, but he would have liked just a bit more insight. He could continue with the resistance as planned, even if the Nenjin knew what he was up to. Legren would just have to keep his ear pressed that much harder to the ground in case they had to move quickly. Otherwise, not much else has changed. So he winds up falling asleep, and I'm still sitting there like wondering what the fuck is going on with his eye. So we have, oh right, chapter 9. God, I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. I'm going to cover this next section pretty quickly, but Brock comes in and says that the northern border is completely blocked off and that mobsters and Vikings are up there, mostly openly fighting, and with a scattering of Nenjin also in there. So there's like just a lot of chaos, and they're not actually like advancing down onto the camp, but they're just sitting there. And nobody's really sure exactly what action to take, if any, regarding this. And Legren is, excuse me, going to visit Zatar. And Zatar, with his friend Teles, who is also a magician, are working on something with an amulet when Legren gets there. And this is when Zatar kind of gets irritated again with Legren, pushing him to try and do something that doesn't actually sound as easy as Legren seems to be suggesting. Legren's like, well, our whole plan is like, hinges on this. And this sentence from Zatar, Legren, you have asked me to do something never before attempted in the entire known history of magic. Alone. There is no way to know what will happen, even if we do finish. You didn't have to agree to this. And what, Zatar scoffed, allowed you to proceed with your plan anyway? What exactly would that accomplish? Allow me? We'd merely provide an occasion for history to repeat itself. Which, I'm really curious what that exactly means. What do you suggest, Legren said after a long charged pause? That you let me work as planned. Creating a magical barrier of normal magnitude would be involved, but adding the condition of all acts of violence is the most complex undertaking I have ever done. It's difficult, but not impossible, and I do believe I will finish by the time our warriors return with new recruits, but you have to trust me and give me room to breathe. So, I'm really wondering about like all acts of violence and exactly what this barrier does and what it means. Like, yeah, I'm not sure what this barrier is even supposed to do. Like, if I was figuring that it was going to be around the township, but maybe not. Maybe it's going to be around Sathara when she goes with, trying to, oh no, but Sathara's already gone, so it can't be that. Yeah, I'm not sure what this means, but Sathara actually has not reported back, and it's been like 2 weeks, as they say. So that feels like bad news, but I hope that nothing happened to her, because as like annoying as she can be, I like her. And obviously she could have been captured or killed or God knows what. So then we have Legren being summoned somewhere to the stables, and there is this adorable little dragon that comes padding up to him, and he like strokes it, and it's this really like sweet little moment, and it turns out that that it's the queen, and I guess that she rode a dragon there, which is rad as hell. And I'm going into this, like, completely skipping this other scene where Legren goes up to Riemann and punches him out for some reason. I'm not sure what that's about. If he has to be unconscious for something, I would imagine magic would do it. Maybe they have to make it look like he's, like, been injured in order to get another plan of theirs off the ground. But evidently this is not a part of the plan that Riemann was let in on, because he's looking at Legren with no suspicion whatsoever that this is coming. Or maybe, because the queen is here, because I got those scenes out of order, he knows that the queen is not going to be on board for this, like, unification plan. And so he has to pretend that Riemann is a prisoner. But if he does have to do that, there's no reason why Riemann can't be informed that that's what they have to do before it happens. So we'll see. But yeah, the queen actually, like, she seems cool but dangerous. They both laughed politely. He watched her, though, closely. Her amusement seemed genuine, her lightness sincere, but more than once he had seen her mood flit from delighted to furious in seconds. In this instance, however, her posture was relaxed and her smile soft. "It has been too long," she said. "I've missed your sense of humor." He bowed slightly. "And I've missed yours, Your Highness." So then we go into part 2, and I probably should have stopped at 9, but I'm going to quickly talk about 10 because it's Jenda's POV, and it's the first time that we've gotten her POV. There's a lot of flashbacks here. And I kind of talked about a lot of it already, which is the flashbacks to their parents being bombed. And I'm not sure if it was Fontasarians who attacked and did that or who it was. I'm not sure that we get that information here. But it was obviously incredibly traumatic. It was like she was dying, when it happened. Like, she was flipping out. And her brother, she, like, cut herself off from him so completely that he has no idea how much this affected him. So it's kind of hard to know the way that he thinks of his sister after reading her POV and seeing how wrong he is and how much it hurts him. And she's with her friends still searching for him. And everybody is actually like, nobody's like, we should be gone. We should leave. He's obviously dead. Nobody's doing that. Everybody's like, listen, we understand. He's your brother. We're still trying to find him. Like, he may be out here, and don't be negative about it. But it's clearly like the more time passes, obviously, the grimmer it's going to get. And so we have the flashbacks, and then, I'm trying to find the exact point because I already talked about the flashback, so I'm going to skip that. But I thought that the flashback was well written. There's a real, like, sense of panic to it, and that, like, kind of disassociation and shock that goes with it. So I found that really effective. And then we come back to the present, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find the exact spot I need to be. Right. So she is hanging out with Garen, who I guess she had been, like, on a date with before. And I don't know if they still have a relationship or if they're just sort of like, together, not together, kind of back and forth sort of thing, just sort of an unofficial thing. But there's something more between them than just their relationship as coworkers. And he's trying to get her to take a break and let him take over the watch because he knows that she's exhausted and that she's not going to be useful if she's exhausted. And they're talking about whether they need to move on to another area. And she's upset, feeling like they didn't send Riemann out well enough prepared for where he was going. Because obviously she's going to want to blame somebody. Meanwhile, the whole camp is completely camouflaged with this really cool tech, and yet they are being zoned in on by Wranglers and Vampians. And I imagine Vampians are vampires and Wranglers are cowboys, which is super fun. And they are pretty much on top of us already, as this guy says. So, let's see. Tear it down. Accept the shield, Garen added. What, just leave it? Jenda asked. You want to fight Vampians and Wranglers? We can't just leave tech for them to find. A loud crash prevented him from replying. Garen and Jenda whirled around to find Mason disjointing the stove unit to pack it up. He gave them both a devious grin. We won't. And that's the end of 10. So, yeah, I don't know what that means. Like, why she says you want to fight Vampians and Wranglers. Like, does the shield only work against one of them? Yeah, I'm curious about what that means, but I'm excited to be in Jenda's POV and to learn more about how the mechs work as well, because they are the ones at this point, you know, we've met one mech and know nothing about them other than what we have heard out of his head. So yeah, that should be interesting. All right. Well, I want to thank Robin again for commissioning this. And yeah, please give me any feedback that you have that you think will help me out with my explanation of everything that I was talking about. And I hope that you guys will pick up this book because it's really fun and it's just so unusual. The story is just wild and I'm excited about it. I just really like getting involved in you know, books that I don't think that I would pick up otherwise because, like, you know, if something isn't highly publicized and there's not a million people telling me, you need to read it, I'm not going to, you know, be able to make time for it. So that's what's nice about the commissions is that it gives me the chance to read things that are new to me. And so, yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and I will hopefully be seeing you soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.